Okay, in this short podcast, we're going to look at the dissolution of the monasteries of England. Now, when Henry VIII made himself head of the Church of England, he feared invasion because the Pope was very angry, and he felt that the French in particular, but also the Spanish, could invade at any minute. Now, to do that and to fight a war, he would need cash. And although Henry VIII was rich and powerful, he was not that rich and powerful. So one of the things that he looked to as the new head of the church is how he could get money from the vast array of monasteries and nunneries and other such church structures around the country. So he turned to his trusted advisor, Thomas Cromwell. If you think of Thomas Cromwell as second in command during this time in the mid-1530s. Now, remember, Cromwell had very strong Protestant leanings. Henry VIII at this time is still very much a Catholic. But he made himself, Henry made Thomas Cromwell what we call the Vicar General, which is kind of two words that you can bring together, a general and a vicar, with the task to look around the churches to see how they could be used to raise cash. For Catholics, monasteries were very, very special places. They were sacred. It was a place where monks went to be locked away from society, to pray for the rest of the population, to save their souls and to ease their passing through purgatory. They also served as hospitals for the local community, places of learning activity. There were schools. They cared for the poor, and they provided income for the economy. But they also sent a lot of their earnings back to the Pope in Rome. And Henry wanted that cash. He wanted that cash to build up his armed forces, to go to war, or to prepare for war. For Protestants, monasteries were a very different thing. They were seen as everything that was wrong with the Catholic Church. And so what we see is Henry VIII's problem about raising money is locked in with this issue of what's going on in Europe with the Reformation. So at this time in England, there were well over 500 monasteries, just under 200 nunneries, and 200 friaries. So they now came under Henry VIII's control, and he then sent Cromwell around the country with two purposes, and he had two commissions. One was to look at how much they were worth, and the other one was to look for any abuses of power that the church had, looking for examples of, what was the word we used in lesson time? Corruption. So the first audit that went out there, the first commission looked for cash, the second one looked for corruption, with the view that if any of these smaller monasteries were not living up to scratch, were not being truly religious and pious, they'd close them down and make money from them. So off they went around the country, and surprisingly, they did find some examples of corruption, but found some examples of these monasteries doing very good things. However, in the end, Cromwell had an agenda. He wanted these monasteries closed, and what he did when the reports came back in is he went to Parliament and he forced through a bill into an Act of Parliament that enabled the closing of the smaller monasteries. Now, in practice, what Cromwell went on to do then was to actually carte blanche close down almost all of them. There was no differentiation in practice. So when a new law came along in 1539, the first one was in 1536, allowing the expansion of the closing of the monasteries. In practice, the dissolution had already taken place, and there's only a few monasteries left. In response to this, there is mass protest, and Henry VIII faces his first public show of discontent, and that is manifested in the 1536 Pilgrimage of Grace. Especially in the north of England, there is protesting in Lincoln, where they occupy the cathedral. 10,000 people protest this against the dissolution there. But more significantly, we see actions in York, where close to 30,000 members, local community members, protest, and they occupy the York Minster there. Now, at this stage, it is important to understand that they did not feel they were out to criticise Henry as head of the church. More so, they were asking for the head of Thomas Cromwell and these so-called advisors who were actually, with a Protestant agenda. They were probably defending the rights of some of these local monasteries as well, which they had probably very close contacts with. However, it's also quite ambiguous. We're not quite sure really what a lot of these protesters were protesting against, because in some of their requests, they were demanding for things that perhaps had nothing to do with the dissolution. Needless to say, the Pilgrimage of Grace was a concern for Henry. He dispatched the Duke of Norfolk to try and intercept the marches, it made its way south. It got as far south as Doncaster, whereby the Duke of Norfolk skillfully bought time. He knew that the protesters themselves couldn't spend too long away from home because they needed to go back and farm. And in the end, he made a compromise with the arrangers, led by Askey, and who was a lawyer, that they would negotiate further, but that the crowds had to disperse. So the crowds went away, and the ringleaders were tried. They were tricked, in a sense. They were tried for treason against King Henry, and they were executed. So that was a close call for Henry, the Pilgrimage of Grace. Needless to say, the dissolution went ahead nonetheless. Many people felt it was a sad day when these monasteries finally closed down. It had a massive social impact. Certainly had a financial impact for Henry. His income doubled as a result of the dissolution of the monasteries. And it really changed the fabric of the nation, because who would look after the poor? Who would teach? And all such things like that. So these are problems that Henry's children would have to face in the years ahead. But there we have it, the dissolution of the monasteries.